Tu podcast w głowie się mieści. So hello everyone, it's Wrap Your Head Around It podcast. My today guest, Mr. George Lockwood. He is a researcher. He is a distinguished researcher and therapist. He is also the honor member of the ISST, the International Society of Schema Therapy. And he's also a founder of the Academy of Cognitive Therapy. He's having a very long career. He was also at the postdoctoral fellowship under the supervision of Aaron Beck, where he met Jeffery'ego Younga. And as I know, you also started to developing schema therapy with Jeffery'ego Younga. And also you are a developer of some new, like for many people, it's something new that I'm talking about the positive schemas and positive reparenting. And maybe also, George, welcome. And would you like maybe introduce yourself from your side?
Ran into Jeff, as you were indicating, at the Center for Cognitive Therapy with postdoctoral fellowship, and he and I became friends soon after, and that was before schema therapy, and so it goes back a long ways. So I have a sense of the sort of the early origins of it and participated in that with him. And so we would talk about friends and patients and family and just thinking about different patterns. And that was something that was of interest to both of us. And those patterns eventually became Jeff's list of schemas as he began to try to coalesce the major themes that would come up in his thinking and our discussions. And so we, I guess another aspect of it was when we were working at the Center for Cognitive Therapy, he was finding patients who ran into the limits of the approach. They might make some changes, but fall back or not be able to really progress with the collaborative approach that was needed with cognitive therapy. So he and I were looking at ways to be able to overcome some of those limitations of standard cognitive therapy. And he continued on there. I moved out to the West Coast and began to get to explore psychodynamic treatments in terms of fleshing out the theoretical perspective of cognitive therapy in terms of early life history and how that tied into what was going on and a deeper understanding of our patients, and then began to get analytic training and became a member of an analytic training institute in San Francisco. And then in 1990, and Jeff and I were in touch with each other over that period of time, and he was looking at Gestalt therapy and ways to be able to activate affect and access more of the emotions that were unavailable oftentimes to patients. And so that was one piece of it. And another part was the dimension of that was his beginning to respond to what seemed to be earlier needs for connection, for early dependency needs to be able to have support and caring and direct comforting. And so that was another thread that was coming into it. And then that converged with my experience as a father with our first son and my understanding of parenting from my own vantage point, my wife and I, as we began to have direct experience with early dependency needs. So there are things that overlap with what Jeff was experiencing around responding to those, and what my wife and I were doing in terms of our son around early dependency needs, and being able to connect and shift from what Jeff had been doing, which was an adult to adult vantage point, and then helping that adult patient in standard cognitive therapy deal with their feelings, with the child part of themselves. And it was a shift from adult to a direct contact with the child part of that patient, and to be able to soothe, comfort, and for me as a parent, my wife, there was that direct contact with the early dependency needs for our young son. And we found parallels in what we were doing in terms of the parenting and what became limited reparenting, and that evolved over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like a core of the of the schema therapy, and maybe we can start from the core of the cognitive of the schema therapy, and how we can tell the basic emotional needs from the perspective of the schema therapy, and maybe from your own experiences. What like we could name
Well, that
them
was
on the beginning.
interesting, because I think that there's been a couple of different vantage points that we've had in schema therapy around core emotional needs. And one is the 18 or 19 schemas, and having, and that has been an approach to look at the schema, like emotional deprivation schema or shame defectiveness, and then to look at how that developed and what the interactions with parents were, and then work back from that to find out what the need was, the need for connection, the need for support or understanding. And the initial thinking was that there were these 18 different needs that would need to be responded to in order to not develop a schema. And Jeff also had this more nutshell kind of list of core needs. So there would be nurturance and safety, the need for play and spontaneity, the need for autonomy, competence, identity, the need for freedom to express feelings, opinions, and the need for adequate limits and self-control. So that was more of sort of a short list of the main needs. And there was that became linked up with a study that I was doing with some co-researchers, and we took the young parenting inventory, which was a list of all the kinds of interactions that would happen with parents that would lead to the schemas. And so there were 15 of them at the time when he developed the inventory. So the idea was that there's these 15 different kinds of things, different themes that go wrong that link with the schemas. And when we did the young parenting inventory was never really empirically validated, and so we set out to empirically validate it, and we found that there were only 6 basic themes rather than the 18 that would correspond to the schema. So something different in terms of the basic pattern of parenting. So that was one piece of it. The other was that realized that no one had ever looked at what was the positive thing. We looked at all the things that parents would do wrong that would lead to schemas, but there was never any attempt to develop items that would be counterpoints to that, with all the things that needed to be done. And it was not necessarily an easy translation from what was wrong to what would be done that would be helpful. So that was another investigation, to be able to develop a large item pool with the young parenting inventory as a starting point, and then to test that out with large samples and factor analyze it and all of that. So by the end, going through all those steps, I ended up back at the point, which is very close to where Jeff had started with these basic core needs. And so, so the 7 positive parenting patterns, or positive parenting schemas, as I call them, are very close to those: emotional nurturance, unconditional love, which was his first one, the nurturing and safety. And then there was playfulness, was part of that, and the spontaneity linked up with the one that he had hypothesized. And then autonomy support, so that, and autonomy granting was another one. So 2 different facets of autonomy. And then dependability is overlaps with the limit setting and sort of adequate self-control. And then there was another one that wasn't specified in his, which we called intrinsic worth, which was helping a child become more process focused and not focused on being more selfish and win and have their own way, but to be able to have fairness and reciprocity and process focus is another thing that a child needs to have help with, to be able to get along with their peers and to be able to feel better about themselves and their whatever capacities they have. And then confidence and competence was another one that it became clear that children needed to have a sense of their parents being able to be strong and to be able to have their act together, to be able to feel secure and confident themselves in the relationship. So those 7 then were a confirmation in terms of looking at doing this study and doing the being able to administer that to both large sample sizes in Western populations and in Asian populations as well, and doing the multi-group factor analysis, which was a pretty comprehensive, thorough testing out of the patterns to see what emerged, and it came out sort of back very close to confirming what he had been talking about, but also in some senses a simpler model, a way to be able to make sense of parenting and what the key elements of parenting are in terms of a useful guide. And then by association with that, what limited reparenting is about.
Yeah, so like, do you mean the positive parenting patterns? Yeah, so it's like, how we can tell those, because they are connected with limiting positive reparenting. So so how we can tell those positive parenting patterns, what they are?
Yeah, so how that's one of the things that is helpful about being able to, that's been good about schema therapy too, because Jeff, when he's hypothesized things and talked about schemas, he's been thorough about it and really wanted to have it be user-friendly, hands-on, and have specific items that he would define a schema with, and then to be able to test it out. And rather than psychoanalysis, which has had these theories and constructs and never really put attention or time into testing it to see if it really held up from a variety of different vantage points. So, so one of the things that's helpful about the positive parenting patterns or schemas is that we have specific items that through the inventories that help to define and flesh it out and what that means. So, so the inventory is available for clinicians or for parents to be able to look at how it's defined and to see what they how they're doing as parents. And as far as the what it looks like in terms of specific constructs, is that with emotional nurturance and unconditional love, it's of the 7 patterns, that's the most involved one. And in a way, we'd see that as pivotal for parenting and reparenting. And so that has to do with a deep attachment, sort of a child feeling really gotten and seen and known in a deep way, and also with a sense of being able to have adequate time to be able to hang out with a parent, and that they're there when they need them, so they've got their back. And
Like,
interestingly, um, this one links up closely with this 85-year-old study that's been going on at Harvard looking at happiness. And they looked at lots of different variables in terms of all kinds of personality measures and medical tests and brain scans. And they wanted to see what things connected with happiness. And through all the hundreds of variables, through all the years and years and decades of research, it zeroed in on one thing. And that's someone having a friend, having somebody close in your life who's got your back. That's the key to happiness. So,
yeah, like so that we can have a lot of money, but yeah, still people are missing something, and this is like the key point. Like like you said, having someone close to you and with a real
right.
bound,
Yeah,
real
right. So
real
there's
relationship.
closeness and depth, and
It's
that
very
you're there
interesting.
for one
Yeah.
another, and that's right. So if you have whatever kinds of status or success or money, if you don't have that kind of relationship, it's relatively empty, and it doesn't do a lot for you. So that's a sort of
Yeah.
fundamental aspect of living and of parenting and of
Yeah.
psychotherapy, of having our patients back,
Mhm.
and they're having that sense of uh, us being there for them in that
Yeah.
way.
Exactly. And the positive schemas, how we can define them? Are they, because someone may think that, are they on the same continuum as the negative schemas, or they are separated constructs? How you can tell what the science says about those
Um,
positive schemas?
it's interesting that just in the big picture around positive schemas and these positive parenting patterns, and then negative schemas and negative parenting patterns. And that we used to think of there being kind of a one-to-one correspondence. As I was saying, that there's a thing that goes wrong in parenting that leads to a schema, and it's not that simple. So we have in the most recent development of the Young Parenting Inventory, looking at all the things that go wrong, we've come up with 10 basic patterns of problematic patterns in parenting. And so that's matched to the 18 schemas. So we have roughly twice as many schemas as things that go wrong. And similarly, with the positive parenting patterns, we have 7 of those, and we came up with 14 um, positive schemas. And so there's it's a more complex
Mhm.
when we look at the schemas, positive schemas, and we look at the positive parenting patterns. There's more that goes on. Um, and just a brief mention of a definition of a positive schema is that it's the same as the negative schema, except it leads to
Mhm.
adaptive capacities and adaptive behavior. But it has its broad theme, and it has to do with um, uh, memories, emotions, implicit memories, explicit memories, and a view of oneself and others that is
Okay.
uh, broad and internalized and operates kind of underneath the fabric of your day-to-day life, providing a lift, providing a sense of well-being,
Okay.
providing a sense of competence, capability that's there in the background, and in a way to support adaptive functioning, to support capacity to love and for intimacy, things like that.
Mhm. So this could be, like for example, the good memories that are coming back to me here and now. For example, when I was doing having some valuable time with my father, for example, and he were caring for me, and like it's triggering the positive um, adaptive behaviors here and now. And for example, something is difficult for me, or it is also connected with just like a well-being, that I having those memories, and that I can live with them, and like having here and now um, positive emotions.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
like
Yeah, that's
is
right.
it
Yeah, that
something like
sense of
I can
him
mention,
and
or
his presence and his belief in you, his love of you, and belief in you if you're going through a difficult time, and the sense that it's going to be okay, and because he's had your back, and sense of feeling worthwhile and appreciated and loved, and feeling positive about yourself. And so, yeah, that's right. And I think that it's in some ways it's as my father has both my parents have passed away, and that became clear too through their death. I remember with my mother just finding out that she had died, and there was the initial grief and pain of that, and then I got up the next morning, and we heat with fire, with a fireplace, and with wood. And so I got up to tend the fire, and I saw that there was the embers left of the fire from
okay.
um, the night, the day before, and there was a sense of that's her, that's my connection with her, the ember that's still there, and there was a sense of warmth and a feeling of she's still there,
Mhm.
and what I've internalized from her, some sort of her love. And so there is that quality, and in some ways it gets highlighted when we lose them, and realizing that they're the spirit of who they are, and how much that's present, and still lives on. Yeah. So that's clearly a positive schema that's a backdrop of well-being and connects to the emotional fulfillment, which is one of the positive schemas. One of the 14 is emotional fulfillment, which is a particularly central one.
Mhm. Hey, great. And do you have some special way of caring about positive schemas, developing them maybe, or to work with our patients, trying to develop their, or maybe connect with those positive patterns from the past, how it influence
Yeah,
our
one of the
traditional schema
influences
therapy
is
works.
in looking at what's going well in our patient's strengths, and we that can often be missed in the shuffle of the pain and the chaos that's
Hmm.
going on in a person's life. But being able to actively track that, and
Yeah.
and that can be done informally and also formally, in terms of having a separate inventory that we can use. And you had asked about how much it is there a continuum, or how much it overlaps with the negative schemas. And I would say it's complex, that some of them are a continuum, like success, failure, or social belonging,
Hmm.
social um, uh, disconnection, are two, for example, that are pretty clear continuum. But one that we hypothesized, shame, defectiveness, and self acceptance, pride, didn't show up at all. And so the structure of that is completely different from what Paul Paris and Jeff Young and I had hypothesized when we first developed the constructs for positive schemas. And so that means that the Young Positive Schema Questionnaire, which is the measure for that we developed, is measuring things in addition to what's going on in the schema questionnaire. So there's um, what's called incremental validity. So if you give someone the YSQ, Young Schema Questionnaire, you can't predict what's going to happen with a young positive schema questionnaire. So one is just in our initial contact with patients and assessing them and what's going on and looking at strengths and as well as the sources of pain and difficulties they have. And similarly with parents, and we have the young young parenting inventory and looking at the problems with their parents and all that went wrong, but also the positive parenting schema inventory to look at what went right and have explicit focus on the good things that went on with parenting too. So it's so being able to have a fuller fleshed out conceptualization is helpful, which reminds me of a personal experience with Jeff when we were in Philadelphia, and I remember standing at a train station waiting for the train to come by, and it was kind of gritty and a lot of cement and broken bits of cement and rock and things like that. And we were standing there, and he was sort of bemoaning the grittiness of where we were in the platform, and I was noticing the dandelion that was growing in the corner and some of the green shoots of things coming up, and as we would talk about patterns and within us and with the people we knew, we noticed that I tended to gravitate towards what I liked about a situation and what was appealing or interesting, and he would tend to gravitate towards what he didn't like and what was irritating or frustrating for him. And so that was similar in terms of in the broader sense of looking at schemas and the early maladaptive schemas and the problems that went on with parenting and that side of it. And so remember him mentioning it, that as we talked about that difference between the two of us, he said, you should do something with that. That's an important trait of yours to work with. So out of that that's been my bent in terms of looking at the bright side in terms of parenting or schemas. And so that's part of it in terms of the being able to look at a fuller appreciation of the whole person as we're starting therapy. So you also mentioned how to work with that in terms of once we started in terms of the actual therapy process and the impact that has there as well. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you because it's, I think, kind of revolutionary also work in the schema therapy, because what I learned is that we mostly work we were working mostly on those negative schemas. And how do you think now, and what your research says about working on the positive schemas, how it can change the schema therapy, and how it can influence the schema therapy?
Yeah, well, I think that the research we don't
future.
know, but I think that from my clinical experience is what I would draw on. And there are specific ways that this has had an impact. And one dimension of therapy, which is sort of the bedrock of a lot of therapy and of a lot of schema therapy, has been looking at pain and suffering and how to minimize that, and how to reduce suffering and help someone feel soothed, comforted, and live a better life because of the suffering. Right. So the other side of it is how to build positive affect, amplify positive affect, and so it's creating something rather than just getting over something or past or minimizing something. So that's been something that I have worked on over the past decade or couple of decades in terms of the building, amplifying the positive, which ties into positive schemas, and one has to do with the spontaneity and capacity to be able to be in touch with yourself and freely express yourself, and for playfulness. And so I, for example, with patients in the early imagery assessment, where we might look for a difficult situation with one or both parents, and through that process, that's one that can often trigger some very painful emotions and bring us to the core of what has been the damage for this little girl or little boy inside the patient. And it's very helpful. And what I've also done is asked for imagery of early positive experiences with mother or father, both parents, and to be able to see what happened that's gone well. And when there's another thing that I have done is I've gone back to early imagery where there are things that have been missing from a parent, and then with the reparenting, I remember with one man who had been severely abused by his father and relatively neglected by his mother, so there wasn't a lot that was positive there. And we had and he can remember having lunches. He would cook out and with his friends, and that was a early positive memory. And I then had him bring me into the image of making a fire and then having lunch. And then I would talk to him, as I think, drawing on my experience as a father with my sons, and thinking about what we would do and imagining an adventure and taking a hike somewhere and where we might go, and then planning and having some kinds of interactions around a young boy and being outdoors and adventure and sharing that experience. And as we did that, he began to cry and then began to sob. And that was a very pivotal and powerful experience for him to be able to introduce the positive, adventurous connection, loving, thoughtful connection with father. And he had never been able to trust any man before in his life. And so that led to sobbing for quite a while afterwards, for a day of that. And then a significant shift for us in terms of his beginning to feel a sense of trust for me. So that was an example of taking something not about comforting, but about building up positive affect and adventure and fun and
and that we can use it. Also to, like, it's a kind of also of by the positive memories, also the positive reparenting, that I understand that that person received care, the caring attention, the warmth from you, and the hiking, something that we are doing together.
Yeah, so that's it. There's also, I'd written a chapter in
something that
the Schema Therapy Handbook on the use of play within schema therapy. So that's related to that. And there have been other patients, like I remember there's one patient who was talking about with a friend about as asking her, who would you be if you were your wild, sort of natural self? And she was thinking about that and about how she would not settle for the scraps of life. She'd want the full meal, but then when she thinks about the full meal, she gets scared. And so what would be the typical within schema therapy would be, well, what is that fear, and what's blocking you? And so what I did at that juncture was asked her if she could close her eyes and then picture that wild self. And she began to have an image of herself on this mountaintop, and I had her bring me in with her, and that led to eventually to this open-ended imaginative play with us doing things on that mountaintop and enjoying the time together, and me drawing on my experience as a parent with my sons in open-ended imaginative play. And that was a whole new experience, something that she'd never experienced with a parent before. And was a different, it overlapped with an approach called Theraplay, which was developed in Chicago, which is works quite quickly for early childhood deprivation and trauma, and where you connect with play with children, and in a way, it's around the back door behind the detached protector mode, and so that can be another way to access the child part of the patient and not have as much of a initial fight back with the detached protector mode, and to be able to connect and build up from the positive direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, I think, shows also how our experiences and our positive schemas and the like being in touch with our positive experiences can also help and influence our therapy. Like you said, that you used your own experiences of being a father to connect with your positive emotions and to
Exactly.
care
That's
of your
really
patient. Yeah.
pivotal point of it, because I think that
Do you?
and that's one of
Mhm.
the things that I think is important about the 7 positive parenting patterns, and we could say the 7 positive limited reparenting patterns, is that whatever you do, I mean, guided imagery and is very powerful, and using chair techniques is very powerful, and very good strategies. And I would say that they won't go very
Yeah.
far, depending upon what you have inside of you as a person, in terms of your basic capacities as a parent,
Mhm.
as a human being, in order to be connected with yourself at a deeper level, and to be able to be playful and spontaneous, to be dependable, conscientious, to be able to be process focused, and to be able to be strong and consistent. Because if you do the greatest imagery work, um, and you have a great session or two, and you don't keep track of what's going on, or you don't honor promises, or you don't follow through, and you're not consistent, and that it's not going to go very far. So I think that having those range of different capacities to be able to be dependable, playful,
Mhm.
spontaneous, understanding, attuned, it involves quite a bit to be able to have what I think of as that whole dance of therapy. It's beyond the technique, it's the dance. The whole dance unfolds over a period of a longer time, which leads to, I
Yes.
know
Yes.
that Jeff has had this experience, and the other schema therapists who work more intensively long term with patients that feel that they've been raised by um, the the therapist, and so that a sense of more fuller sense of having been parented, and being able to become more of a fully functioning, fulfilled, happy adult through the process of that relationship.
Yeah, and I also wanted to ask you. I think that those are like the first tips. Because I wanted to ask, do you have any practical tips for the therapist that wants to implement the positive schemas and to work on them? And I think that one of them is to also use our own experiences and like to constantly follow them. And yeah, and um, what would be from you some other tips for the therapists that want to enhance their
Yeah, I think
work?
that drawing on yourself and being able to do any self work in terms of being able to um, around, I guess, the core themes. And I would say the other thing I'll mention about that as a reference point for the positive schemas, because there are 14 different ones that we found, and we did a secondary factor analysis of those to see how they
Yeah.
the larger, like what's equivalent to the domains within um, the schema domains, which there are 4, and there turned out to be 4 similarly within the um, positive schemas. And the one was a connection domain, and the other was the autonomy in terms of being capable and functioning on terms of a day-to-day way and feeling confident in that respect. And then the other was realistic standards and reciprocity was a third major one, which looks quite different from what we from the third domain within the schemas, and that's a whole interesting story in itself. But then the fourth one was success and self-control and self-discipline was a fourth major one. So I think that would be one, is being able to have those basic things that you're drawing on to, which is beyond a tip, but just a core capacity. The other that can, in terms of the tip side of it, would be using the positive parenting schema inventory within the session. If you were to give it once the therapy's underway and gone for a while, to be able to give it to the patient, client, to fill out for their experience of you as a therapist. And that would be helpful, interesting feedback in terms of how they're experiencing you in those different dimensions, to be able to talk about that, and then to reflect on what things you could do more of, or reflect on what's going well in terms of what is being especially helpful to them in the therapy process. So I think that the other is looking at the other is looking and administering the Young positive schema questionnaire, being able to look at the ones that are going well and to be able to leverage those. For example, if a client is particularly capable in terms of their autonomous functioning, and they're particularly hurt and damaged in terms of emotional fulfillment, and that helps them in terms of being able to follow through and appreciating their strength to be able to stick with the therapy and hang in through difficult times and follow up on suggestions and drawing on their capacity for autonomous functioning. So you can look at how strengths tie into and appreciate how those can be leveraged in terms of the challenges and the work on and developing emotional fulfillment. And then also then looking at the different positive schemas like emotional fulfillment, to be able to see what they're aiming for, not just not feeling lonely, but being able to feel special, to be able to feel like they have spaciousness and fullness in terms of an intimate connection with someone, and be able to have more of the full experience of what can be taken in through an intimate, deep relationship.
Great, thank you. And maybe my last questions, because I don't want you to took you too long. Your experiences also includes various therapeutic approaches, such as cognitive therapy, psychoanalytic, and schema therapy, and how those different approaches influence your work on positive schemas. And do you think the intention of different therapeutic perspective can contribute to be a more effective of use those positive schemas in practice?
Well, I think that as schema therapy has drawn on cognitive behavioral therapy and being concrete and user friendly, so I think that's the aspect of having inventories. When you think about positive schemas, what is it? How to define it? We have inventories that make that up. So I think that's the CBT element within, and looking at specific strategies and steps you can take to work on it. I think with the psychoanalytic influence I've had, there's been a sense of the the depth-oriented understanding of early childhood and how things, getting a full picture of all that went wrong. I think what's added to it is all that went right, more of appreciation of that by way of the developments I've been working on with colleagues. And then I think that the other related to the analytic work is the capacity of us as people, that it's a whole relationship. It's not a set of techniques, but it's a whole relationship that, and in a way, where some analytic colleagues are talking about therapy being, the techniques and strategies were like the popcorn when you're at the movie. And, but the movie is the actual relationship and the capacities of the therapist. And it's more, yeah, it is.
Yeah, wow.
So I think
Beautiful
I draw on
metaphor.
that in terms of the fuller experience of what the change process involves as a whole relationship, and drawing on the capacities. I think if you have it's limited by the capacity that the therapist has to be able to bring to that relationship. So I think that's another thing too, related to metaphors. I think that
Great.
I
And
find that helpful in terms of the use of metaphors, in terms of understanding a patient's experience and how they're evolving in the therapy process. And
yeah, it's also in my clinical work, I try to use as many metaphors as I can, because I feel that they can also maybe not trigger the experiences, but patient can experience, for example, some it's less the didactic, more experiential. We can talk with patients, or maybe that could be a good for me on explanation.
yes, no, I've found
And
that
also I love
using that
metaphors.
more so over time, and I find that it takes complex experience and can capture it in image, or capture it in a way that is emotionally impactful and gives a
Yeah.
sense of where things have been and where things are headed.
Yeah, and I can't wait when we'll have in Poland the it would be published by Gdańskie Wydawnictwo Psychologiczne. They already published many schema therapy books, like the one schema therapy of Jeffery'ego Young, Eckhart Rodiger, and the contextual schema therapy. Also, I forgot the name right now. But they released many schema therapy books. Very, I think, like very important ones, and I can't wait when we'll have the creative methods in schema therapy, where also there we can read more about those positive schemas and emotional needs. So yeah, I can't wait. And maybe you would on the end, like, give a message from you to the maybe Polish schema therapy society, or to the in general, maybe not only, but to the therapist
For me to give a
from
message
you.
now, are you saying? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, if it's okay for you,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
we can,
first, I'd
like,
like to thank you for setting this up, and appreciate this, and appreciate all you're doing in terms of being able to explore the therapeutic process, explore schema therapy as it relates to the larger picture, and help to learn and educate other people. So that's wonderful. And so I guess the message for me in terms of main thing here is that the schema therapy has very powerful techniques and strategies, and The imagery scripting is a central one with that as well. Chair work can be very helpful in ways to activate affect and get at the emotional core of what someone has experienced, and also to be able to flesh out and understand their childhood and early life experiences, and to be able to conceptualize things in a full and articulate way, which is really good. And I think adding to all that is the relationship and limited reparenting is sort of a central piece of it, and that within that there can be more that we can do to help reach that vulnerable child, and to, rather than teaching and instructing, which I think is important, but also connecting and directly meeting needs to be able to help where there's been more trauma or more deprivation, to be able to help build up capacities, build up comforting and soothing, and build up spontaneity and playfulness and joy. And we draw on ourselves to be able to do that. And in some ways, or in many ways, I find that my shift from working psychoanalytically and then working with standard cognitive behavioral therapy opened me up as a person and allowed me to be able to bring much more of who I am as a person into the therapy, and to be able to draw on, have a client be able to draw on that in terms of sources of creating new experience and new virtual structures in their brain, because I think that there's a rewiring that goes on between various structures that is a physical reality of what we're doing.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you from the bottom of my heart that we could talk together, and and I hope
It'd be
see
wonderful.
you sometime somewhere.
This has been a while in coming, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and getting to know you has been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much.